Hello, hello. I'm Pinar Givanch, and welcome to What's Wrong with the podcast. Today, we have the great pleasure of speaking with Nader Afzalan. He is the founder of The Triangle, a firm dedicated to supporting organizations in enhancing the community impact of their programs and policies as they navigate urban transitions. He is also the Endowed Chair of Social Justice and a visiting professor at the University of California, Berkeley College of Environmental Design. Nader collaborates with organizations to examine the potential, future, and observe impacts of their programs and policies. His expertise bridges climate resilience, collaborative governance, technology, and smart cities. With more than 20 years of professional experience, Nader has led policies and programs across diverse regions, including the United States, China, Central America, and the Middle East. As a scholar, Nader has published over 30 articles and book chapters in peer-reviewed journals, with his work cited more than 700 times. Enjoy. Nader, welcome.
Thank you, Pinar. I'm glad to be here.
So please tell us more about yourself and how you came to where you are today.
That's a pretty broad, interesting question. As you mentioned, I'm the founder of The Triangle and also a faculty at UC Berkeley. My work currently very much focuses on impact. I do help organizations with increasing the impact of their work on the community side. So, for example, if organizations are trying to figure out how to implement an inclusive economic development program or policy, what do they mean by inclusivity? What do they mean by equity? What do they mean by economic development? Is it more about job creation? Is it more about high quality jobs? So a lot of help and support toward understanding the outcomes and also clarifying how we can have a shared language around what that exact outcome is and how to get there. I have done a lot of work around data analytics, scenario planning, so I'm still bringing all of that experience in this world of impact assessment and clarifying that shared language around the main outcome and how to get there. So I help organizations with tracking success, measuring success, tracking success, and figuring out what indicators and criteria they can use to understand if they are on a right track or not. So my whole background from bachelor's to master's and Ph.D. is in urban planning and design. I've worked in the US and internationally. I grew up, born and raised in Iran, worked as a professional planner for 9 or 10 years. And since then, I've been working across the world, mainly in the US, Iranian American. So most of my work is happening in California and the US, but I've been working in Panama, China, Brazil, working with NEOM in Saudi Arabia on the Line project. So it's been pretty diverse, but a lot of my work has been focused on how you can design programs that make an impact, how you can design policy programs that get to what they really want to get to.
I love that because I'm curious if that kind of sparked from the gap. I mean, I'm assuming a gap that you were seeing as a planner. Obviously, when we talk about urban planning, there's a lot of diversity in what we mean by an urban context is, and many communities. And what were some of the gaps that you observed that kind of really pushed you in this direction?
Yeah, that's a great point, Pinar, about the gaps, because when I was an academic, I did a lot of academic work as a scholar, and I published in all of these fancy journals that you can imagine. But after realizing no one is really reading these journals and my articles, I decided to join the policy world, and that helped me a lot with understanding some of those gaps that you're talking about. When I was in academia, a lot of my research was focused on technology and public engagement, or technology and collaborative processes, ways in which planners and policymakers can use all of these different types of tools and technologies, mostly focused on digital technologies like social media. And at the time, we're talking about like 15 years ago, like Twitter was something interesting that planners would use for public engagement and all of that. In addition to that, I've been looking at, for example, scenario planning tools and ways in which they can help policymakers and planners make better decisions, especially when collaborating with other stakeholders and the public. I think at the time I was very critical of how planners and policymakers have been using these tools, and I thought, well, they could do a much better job in using them more effectively. And then I joined the real world environment and realized this is extremely complicated and difficult. And during my work with the state of California, I work with, until recently, I was senior advisor to Governor Gavin Newsom in California, senior advisor for community and economic resilience. And I work with other state agencies as well, like California Air Resources Board, our housing agency. What the gap I see here is getting from intention to real impact. So, for example, when we are running all of these interesting public engagement processes with, I believe, good intentions, I'm not sure to what extent we really get to what we really want to get to. I'm not sure to what extent we're really empowering communities. In many cases, unintentionally, I think we're somehow tokenizing their engagement. I can go on and on about this, but it's not only about engagement processes. It's about running a lot of programs that are well-intentioned, trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or foster community resilience or create jobs, focusing on equity and inclusivity. With the election results, we're seeing that people are not either receiving the impact, or maybe they're not. Maybe those are not well communicated. So that's the gap I see in terms of intention to impact.
That's a really good point on not understanding almost the ROI of doing this work, right? Because I feel like sometimes, and maybe this is in like urban planning, but also in like other industries, when you talk about community engagement, it is often almost like put into a category where it's like, oh, this is social responsibility or a charitable act or whatever it is, right? Which, it is social responsibility, but it is also, it just is a way to generate better outcomes or even like hedging risk, right? So there's immense value in generating insights on things that actually may work especially to your point, a very complex ecosystem. But it seems like either, and I would love your thoughts on this, because I don't know, right? Like, I feel like for us who like in this space kind of see, well, obviously it's just a better way of doing it. Like, it just creates better outcomes, right? So it feels obvious, but just because it's common sense doesn't mean it's common practice is one of my favorite quotes. So either it wasn't done enough or in a way that resulted in something, so there's skepticism around it, or maybe it's not being even familiar in how to go about it, or just having what we call engagement processes in a misaligned way in what we're trying to generate. Exactly to your point, if it is extremely effective, it shouldn't be easily replaced overnight because, we're told to.
Sure.
So would love your thoughts on that. Like, maybe this goes back to the gap, but why do you think, even though people in the space see how effective it is, why don't we, why is there a misconnection there on what is the ROI coming out of engagement or co-creation, collaboration, whatever we want to say?
Right. So let's look at some of these legislations that are asking for something to happen in regards to climate and job creation.
Yeah.
When a bill or legislation is being developed, a lot of different legislators and policies advocates put things into the bill and legislation so that it's going to get passed. So each legislation, in many cases, is a really hush-posh of so many different ideas, and it's why it's kind of ready to get to the governor's desk and get that signature. But in reality, when you are in government, and I've realized I've experienced that firsthand with multiple programs, you have that legislation, you know that the governor is going to sign it, you're waiting for it, excited to get started, and then you see the bill, and there are all these different agencies, organizations trying to work together, clarify even what the bill wants to do, because it is a hodgepodge of everything. And there are so many different interest groups with different ideas, and there's so many ambiguities that makes it a little bit difficult for the department to even clarify what exactly the bill wants to do and how to get there. So I think that's the time that departments need to pause and just take a deep breath and try to create that shared language around the outcome that they want to get, and be a little bit bold and say, oh, we're not going to be able to do this. Because if you are trying to do everything, nothing is going to happen. So in many cases, what's happening is that legislation is passed, you're trying to create this program, you're trying to understand what it does, and you're trying to make everyone happy because you're kind of running in a political environment. And in many cases, folks are not comfortable getting into those kinds of conflicts with different stakeholders. You're trying to keep everyone happy, and you move with that. And trying to keep everyone happy results in not being that effective. So I think we need to get together, create that shared language, clarify the outcome, and to be very frank, be more comfortable with just saying no to some of the ideas.
Yeah. That's so interesting because it's so chronic no matter what we're talking about, right? Like we could be talking about something around cities, climate, AI, whatever we're talking about, similar issues. And it almost seems, like being kind of coming from this maybe a design thinking perspective. After you're done with research, right, there's part of synthesis, which also is the weakest muscle, I feel like, in, across industries. Like, how do we jump from data or the input to something? And what I'm hearing from you is kind of like, yes, we will have, like, it is almost impossible to achieve pure alignment in all these diverse stakeholders, including even in maybe definitions, to your point, like what does that really mean to you or to them? Then the job there that when like coming up with the legislation is really like a synthesis of everything that you're seeing, which very much to your point could mean prioritizing some things over other, or in other words, saying no to some other stuff, right? Like, but really be able to interpret what all of that really means through a lens that kind of has broader understanding, let's say, for the city, right? Or for, which is very interesting because then actually, whoever is doing that synthesizing, it is really good to have many diverse point of views and experiences in that room, so that synthesis could also, synthesis always will have bias, obviously inherently to the process, there will be some bias infusion, but at least there's diverse bias kind of infused into it. Do you find kind of that like, almost like a playbook, right, for how to go about synthesizing or defining what you're seeing, be kind of like or like as a potential intervention, or not to solve all these problems, but intervention into this challenge.
Yes. And to be fair, this is not only happening at the state level, it happens with even nonprofits that are trying to run a smaller program. So the way I have found it to be helpful is, and it's how I'm working with my clients and also running my, for example, studio courses at the university. We get together and try to clarify what we want to get out of this program or policy or legislation. What is that North Star and how you really want to get there? And this process takes a little bit of time because you would need to organize all of these workshops and sit down with people, and sometimes you have to just give away some of your ambitions. So, and running at the speed of trust is time consuming, but in many cases that's what we would need to do, which means that spending a little bit of time in advance, clarifying what the outcomes are, what is the impact we want to make, what are the outcomes and how we get there. What I've observed happening in a lot of work that I've been involved with is that we run because there is timeline, you need to wrap up the project. You are 1 year into the project and still people are not very clear exactly what the North Star is, what the outcomes are. After 1 year, people figure out, oh my God, it would be actually even a lot more efficient if we just take a little bit of time making all of these clarifications in advance.
Yeah, and even like figuring out how to communicate maybe that North Star to diverse stakeholders, right? Going back to kind of maybe inclusive communication so it resonates. And I guess that's kind of the misconception, right? Like this will slow us down, but the payback, like the cost of it not doing in the beginning is so much more vast. So even if you hit a timeline target, what you're getting may not be what you want to achieve. Or even at that point, because we see some, let's say, community engagement efforts happening, right? In the beginning of a project, like with great intention, right? And then we go back to our boxes and run, and go back and we're like, hey, by the way, like this came out of that, and it's like a total alien thing. So even maybe, yes, we could still run, but what are some practices in that sprint, right? Like because like, I think another maybe misconception, and I know what you think about this, but I find people being quite reasonable. I mean, nobody will ever always be like that, and we can never achieve a common reasonable, population. But like when you communicate, oh, this can't be done, or we can't do this now, or this is simply not feasible at this stage. Like, it's better to understand that, or even like be aware of that until, to compare to not hearing anything and then at the end, like, oh, they didn't do that, but we told them those. Like it's kind of that, like how that process is designed is equally as important as.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, we were running this program, which was a massive program, over $500 million program at the state. And the program was focused on equitable economic development at the regional level. We were about a year into the program, and we still were not clear what we mean by equity here. Is it like underserved communities going to get something? What is it exactly they're going to get out of this program? Who is the exact beneficiary? Are we even looking at population and underserved communities, or we're looking at regional boundaries, like helping a particular region to grow? And this created a lot of confusion among our stakeholders. But if we go back and clarify all of these details in advance, and as you are saying, communicating them very early on, it would help setting the expectations. It would help folks rallying all the power just toward that particular outcome or particular economic development or equitable economic development outcome that they're trying to get to. I think that clarification around the definition and outcome is going to help a lot with communication, setting the expectation, building trust, and also rallying all of our forces toward that.
Having more sense of ownership, almost like shared ownership.
Shared ownership. And I mean, we all talk about design thinking and like iteration, piloting process. This is some sort of piloting process. So just get together, go through the whole process. This is what we want to get by 2045. This is what we want to do by the end of this program, which is only like 3 years. And this is how we're going to get there. And we can iterate on that as well. I mean, it's all, I think in many cases, organizations are not very comfortable communicating something that they're not completely sure about because they think, oh, it's going to create mistrust and etc. But it's not. People are already suspicious about what you're doing. So let's just communicate what you want to do.
Exactly. Let's acknowledge the context. Nobody's trusting us. Okay.
I mean, communicate it and change it and say, just say, this is our plan, and this may change based on what we learn.
Right. It's so interesting, right? Like, I think it's like we see this in, when you go out of public policy too, like in industries, like there's this fear of transparency of the process. As if, there's generally not enough skepticism towards bigger institutions, right? Like there might be distrust. There might be skepticism, any big corp, government, right? Like from communities, it's almost more relieving to just like acknowledge that and operate with that knowing,
Yep. Yes.
Very, very interesting. Do you think, and not necessarily for that example, but have you ever seen in like other cases where that transparency and even what we mean by, for example, something is intentional to not having to commit to something fully? So if they're like, if I'm thinking, if they commit to a pure definition, right, and this is what we mean by this, and this is what we're going to do, does that create the pressure to then whatever outcome is being generated should definitely honor that definition? So running away from defining, is it sometimes seen as, well, we're committing to this, but like not fully?
It does. I mean, if you promise something and it's clear that you're trying to create 5,000 more jobs by 2030, and it's 2030, you're not there, and LA Times is going to hammer you for that. But what we're seeing now is that social media and news outlets are going to do that anyway.
Right.
So like you see folks on X, totally. You see folks on X doing, like, saying everything. I mean, people are saying everything without really backing up, with even no evidence. I think our institutions should be just more comfortable saying that, well, this is what we are trying to do, and this is our goal. We may or may not get there. But I think that transparency helps a lot with trust building, and we are in it together instead of just holding off. But I think you're absolutely right, Pinar.
I mean, even because we actually do set out very bold goals, right? So that we're not like, there are these objectives by 2030, we're going to do this, 2050, 2045. And then you're like, if you're committing to that, it seems, you can commit to, like, how many times we see something like we have the 2050 goal for a city, and then how we're going to get there is XYZ, and one of those letters is like community engagement, but they don't necessarily share what that means, and it feels so counterintuitive because, well, you committed to the goal. But maybe there should be clear, like, I'm almost at a point like we should not use the word collaboration anymore unless we come with defining what that means.
I love that. I tried to stop using the word equity and I failed. I completely failed. It's so hard to, but yes, I get it.
But I'm sure when you're communicating, you explain what you mean by it. At least come with your version of it too, so we know what type of different definitions are at the table as well.
Totally. Totally. And I think clarifying that processes like community engagement, I mean, in most cases, that's not the goal. That's not the impact we want to see. We do this to get to something else. We do this to empower people, to help us figure out where to locate all of these bike sharing stations, for example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
And
the better location of bike sharing stations that works for everyone or our target audience or target population, that's the impact we want to get. The engagement process is just a process. And to be very fair, if the engagement is not going to help with that, I'm not sure if you want to even do it.
Right.
If you have like 2 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have 2 days to make, you have a week to make a decision. For whatever reason. And if you don't make decisions, you're going to lose those funds to create the bike share system, for example.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can do a really inclusive process, go through an inclusive process in a week. And if you try public engagement, I can imagine in most cases, those who have interest are just going to push for particular ideas and suddenly you realize all the bike share stations are close to those businesses that benefit from it.
Yeah. It's almost like knowing that you need to put in the bike share system or the station should already be informed, hopefully, by community, like more like a long-term maybe engagement. And therefore, after that, going back to your earlier point, like really slowing down for a second, what are we doing here, and kind of doing the planning, and maybe engagement is part of that planning, so that when you are going to do something, you can actually sprint. Because ideally, we want to have, or in that like short process, a very diverse team that also includes lived experiences, not only professional, right? So you could like, at least it is kind of a sample set, almost like there's quick co-creation happening in that week without having to go through the mechanisms of a public engagement. But what, like, the process could look like that could happen way earlier on or an ongoing basis, so that when you need to sprint, you can sprint.
But no, I think you're talking about the ideal version. Yes, that would be very ideal version.
Yes.
And if that ideal version has not happened yet, sometimes running a GIS analysis, understanding where underserved communities are, can help you a lot, rather than organizing 1 or 2 meetings where only those with the power coming to your meeting and shaping the decisions.
Yeah. But to that point, that's very useful, I think, because sometimes we hear the excuse to not even do the research, right? And the excuse would come with like time, budget, whatever. There's always some constraint, right? I think we can take it for granted that time will always be a, constraint, and so we're operating within that. What are some other, like, that was a really good example, like almost MVPs, right? Like the least you could do. Like there's a book called Just Enough Research. It's kind of like that. Like what could be some other mechanisms of doing like just enough in such a tightened period?
Public engagement makes sense if it responds to public interest and your target population. If your target population is low-income families or disadvantaged communities, and the public engagement process responds to the needs and goals of them, perfect.
Yeah.
But if you know that you are running this public engagement process, which is basically not capable of responding to their interest because of resources, time, whatever that is, then I think doing archival research, more targeted interviews, maybe holding just a few focus group sessions with a targeted population, those kind of things might be more beneficial than going through a traditional public engagement in a very short period of time, where we know that those who need childcare cannot join your public meeting.
Right. You almost, because if you want to do proper public engagement, you need to meet people where they're at and kind of design the process around that, and that can take some time. This is really helpful because what I often hear from like younger professionals, obviously, like going back to the ideal version of things, right? They have this ideals in their head, really pumped coming into the industry or the field, and then get so discouraged by not being able to do something in the way that it should be done, which we need to kind of remind these, small steps are still steps that you could take, right? So it's meaningful. And I think that's, it's great for them to like hear this from you too, in terms of like, you don't have to necessarily give up all or nothing. We didn't do that process, so we're not going to do anything at all. But what are some like smaller things you could do?
Yeah. One thing that, exactly, I think I have done this as well. I'm a faculty, so I've been teaching even public engagement, and I kind of grew up in a system that was like public engagement was like sometimes like the goal versus like just the process to get to the goal. And I've been like critical of like, well, why planners sometimes do not do a holistic or very deep public engagement process, going through empowerment instead of just a shallow process, and it's everything. I am a victim of that kind of education, and I feel responsible for some of the younger generation students who are very passionate about doing this right, and etc. That as you also mentioned, but then getting discouraged. So I do feel responsible, and I was part of this too, but I mean, we all learn through this process, and based on my probably 5-10 years of experience in more recent experience, I think we need to step back and just think about what is it we want to get out of it, and what's the best strategy to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Creating these like strategic tactics, almost like a toolkit that you can have, that you can utilize, which then, we could think of even the more you practice these like different methods of going about it, the faster you hopefully then also become, right? The more you iterate in your workspace.
And what I have learned in a practical way is that when you are in a setting that team is trying to make decision about how to move forward, for example, with designing a public engagement process or defining the program goals and etc. I think asking what and why questions helps a lot. And sometimes someone says, okay, we have to do public engagement because this is the right way to do it. And then you can ask, why do you think that? What is it that you want to get out of it? And I actually believe what type of questions is better than why, because people are like, when you say why, people may not really like that question. Like, Are you questioning my
Yeah, yeah,
integrity
yeah,
here?
yeah. Yeah, or it
But
could
like,
be pulled to politics immediately. But yeah,
totally,
yeah, that's a
what
really
is
good
it you
point.
want to get out of this? What would be the result of this? Do you think this method is going to empower those who are really trying to empower? I think asking these types of questions help a lot with getting to the root and the juice of that purpose. And when you get to that juice of the purpose, it's going to be easier for people just to collaborate and just get together, share thoughts, and come up with that kind of shared understanding about the
Yeah,
strategy.
yeah, that's such a good point, and I think that's such a useful um, comment. I mean, in baseline, the dictionary definition of collaboration is like having shared goals. So, like, you do
Mm,
want to ask, like, what are we really trying to, what are the objectives? Like, what are we trying to
right.
get out of that process? So you can actually maybe reframe the process that, like,
Mm-hmm.
for, good intentions become the main goal, but it's not really, it's still the process. And then how
Right.
can we reframe that to really achieve those objectives? And hopefully, with that, if we have the aligned objectives, that will result in better collaboration already. So this
Right.
is already like incredible advice. I wish someone told me, when I was 18, maybe, or like 20. But what other advice would you like to give to any young professional or student who's trying to, get into fields that pushing for progress or meaningful work?
Um, so, Pinar, I've been working for about 25 years already, and I'm still learning. But I think the main advice I have is to pause, think about the impact you want to get, and see if your intention and actions are going to get to that impact.
Mm,
That pause helps a lot. And if you are at some point working in government or even having a political role, I do believe if you don't risk your career, it's really going to be hard to do a good job.
wow.
And I'm not saying that you should risk your political career
Or like
because we all
careless
have
risk.
families.
I'm not talking about careless risk. No.
We all have families, we all have mortgages, and I have
Yeah.
2 kids. I need to pay for daycare. Um, but it's at in this era and what's happening right now, uh, playing safe, I'm not sure to what extent that's going to get to the results we want to see. And again, I'm
I,
not suggesting not to play safe, but if you're playing safe,
informed risk, or what do we call it? Like, it's not even, it's just being brave in some things, right? Like, I guess it's risk to be brave. But it's
yes.
really, yeah, but yeah, I mean, I love vanilla ice cream, but don't be vanilla.
Just
Um,
be bold. Be bold. Criticize others if their ideas are not working in a way that it's collaborative and it
yeah,
gets them thinking. So we're not in a fight, but
yeah,
not everything is correct. And someone like me who's been in the field for 25 years, I'm still learning.
yeah.
Just understanding how to communicate well while being brave is going to help everyone.
That's so powerful. And the pausing and the questions will help in doing that anyway, right? Like you're not saying take, you know, non like informed risks.
Oh, yeah, I think we all get what I mean, but
Yes.
yes, I'm not saying that just go ahead and, yeah, risk your life or career. Be bold.
Well, yeah. I wish, I mean, this, especially like the pause is so meaningful. I think we're in such a fast pace. We always feel pressured on time and deadlines and everything, but that pause will actually give the additional fuel to run faster later and the energy to run faster later. So thank you so much for sharing that. And thanks for your like insights reporting from the field and your experience. And I know this is kind of like a high level conversation, but I think we also got to very tangible actions in from what you've shared. So thank you so much for making the time.
It was fun. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Pinar.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. If you found value in these conversations, please like our video and hit the subscribe button. Make sure to visit our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz, and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts so you never miss an episode. Please leave us a comment or review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can find our handles in the description below. And don't forget to join us next week. See you.